Okay. So I think that we're addressing a lot of very large and complex processes, from the classroom to the global reality. And I'm wondering if we could integrate a bit into this conversation your work in knowledge socialism. If perhaps you could talk a little bit about that. And then we're also quite curious how these larger sort of structural cultural processes present different forms of sort of tensions and challenges to that project. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, so knowledge socialism. I spent a lot of time looking at question knowledge economy, and I started a journal called Policy Futures in Education in about 2003 in Glasgow when I was there, and really the agenda for that journal was to look at the critique of knowledge economy, particularly the Marxist critique of knowledge economy. When it was all accepted that here was Chicago school thinking, and also a mix of other ideas from Roma at Stanford, endogenous growth theory, and a whole bunch of other stuff, all American, pretty well all American, come down the chain from Austrian economics. And really, there's no effective kind of, it was institutionalized by OECD, World Bank, in the 90s. And it became, part of so-called Western common sense. My aim really was to critique it through a Marxist, critique of capital. That only went so far, because it seemed to me that also now we were facing a new kind of phenomena in neoliberal capitalism, which we call, under globalization, we'd say financialization, the financial model, financialization of everything, financialization of education, which included the privatization, but also, the massive $1.5 trillion US loan scheme and student debt. Here we saw a view of financialization taking place, a big deal. And also, let me say, a questioning of the key assumption of traditional political economy, Marxist radical political economy, the concept of labor. What happened to the concept of labor here? And when you introduce AI, deep learning, these sophisticated cybernetic networks and so on, and you have AI and robotization and so on, the old industrial concept of labor and style of politics goes out the window. So, that's what I was focusing on. And it seemed to me that knowledge socialism was a model that was already existent and working. Forms of collaboration, collegiality, based on the central importance for knowledge production of peer production. And that peer production for me went back to the beginning, the heart of modern science, where then the science journals began to accept peer review. I still think it's a really strong feature, and it's a generative feature for knowledge socialism. So it came as no surprise, but I was mightily impressed when Europe Science, which provides €9 billion funding, decided to embark on Plan S, which was to make access to all scientific journals public, using public money, open to everyone. So I thought that was quite a good step. And then I thought, we've got forms of collective intelligence. And I really followed the work of the French theorist of, had his chair in collective intelligence. And I really liked Yochai Benkler's work at the beginning. And, and I really now see that here is an alternative mode, existing mode, that exists in overlap and nestled in, in these new apps and so on, becoming adopted by, places like in China and so on. So that prompted me to not only theorize that, but trying to do with educational philosophy and theory. We do a lot of, the notion of collective writing. So, collective writing here is, you go into those pages, you see like masses of articles now that are not individual products. They're collective, and they include a lot of people. And so, by really beginning to reform the industrial genres of the journal that are mandated by the big publishers, I think we have a chance of beginning to, develop alternative kind of arrangement.
And when did you start with because you mentioned collective writing, and that's something that's definitely been showing up a lot in educational philosophy and theory. When did you start doing that, I guess, or when did you introduce that?
Well, what I wanted to do was to work with the PISA executive. And so I got them as my group, who were prepared to experiment with this form. And, and I think back in 2017, we wrote a paper called a philosophy of academic publishing, where the collective writing was part of it, but also open peer review. So we started changing some of the practices, and we quickly came up against publishers, who said, well, we're not sure whether you can do this or not, so that worked very well. And other people picked up on it quite quickly, and they realized that the collective article, where somebody writes a 500-word piece, if it's if the architecture is there and it's well structured, then, probably writing 500 words, somebody can do that before breakfast. And they can have it considered. It's a different kind of genre, and and I had a lot of people who were really interested in experimenting with it with me, and they've gone off on their own and done their own thing now. So I'm really pleased that we have managed to reform that genre, because the academic article is immensely dull. And very, very, it's, I think there don't seem to be any innovation gains to the big companies in trying to change it. The innovation has to come from the academics themselves, They keep making the money. They make huge amounts of money from academics who are a form of slave labor, really. So, I want to kind of try and change that. So it can, knowledge socialism has a theoretical dimension, but it also has a practical dimension to it. And, trying to work through what those new practices should be has been kind of like quite an interesting kind of pastime.
I have many questions I want to ask right now, so I'm going to try to fold them into one, which is usually not a good idea.
Sure.
But yeah, so knowledge socialism sort of emerging out of this engagement with post-industrial economy, knowledge economy, and then Marxist and post-Marxist thinkers on the general intellect, looking at back even to Daniel Bell, looking at how knowledge is quickly becoming a key source of valorization and a commodity. And so working with these big academic journals and producing knowledge within that architecture, we're aware that this is a commodification of knowledge, even though simultaneously it has potentials in the world and in thought and so on. So one question is sort of like, how do you navigate those tensions in your theory of academic publishing and knowledge socialism and the work that you're doing, but also to bring it back to this notion of ecology too. I've been reading about cybernetics, and to bring it back to Leotard, in some of this. This industrial process of academic production is also in some ways a cybernetic process, performativity, optimization, all of these things. And I've been sort of interested in the early cybernetics, in the efforts of those thinkers to collapse notions of the natural and social toward the gains and optimization. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's some of the things that I'm thinking about, but how also ecological issues are also imminent to this system of commodification, and also efforts toward openness and knowledge socialism, the production of knowledge toward other ends than just strictly optimization or valorization. So I'm just wondering your thoughts about any and all of that.
Well, my starting point really, those Macy conferences that took place in New York in the 50s, where the great cybernetic theorists came from, Pask and so on. And it also included Gregory Bateson, an anthropologist. And he wrote a book called Steps Towards an Ecology of Mind. So for me, that was inspiring to Deleuze and Guattari. When they came to formulate their post-structuralism, their particular view of schizoanalysis and schizo-capitalism, they really drew on Bateson's kinds of concept, because he was really adopting a cybernetic view of the mind, of the human mind. And and he didn't extend it into the material domain. Well, he did in some of his field work with people in the Pacific, in his PhD called Narvern, where he details some of these practices. But what we have here is Steps Towards an Ecology of Mind. Is a cybernetic, but also therapeutic kind of appreciation of knowledge anxiety, of anxieties to do with sometimes double loop learning through, that here is an informational model that he presented of schizophrenia, where they were receiving paradoxical remarks at one level. And, I think that R.D. Lang picked up on that as well. You wanted to point the finger no longer at the schizophrenic, so-called labeled, but at the dysfunctional family, and we considered the family as an information system. So let's put it this way. I think there's some early models there that began to bring these things together in this way. And I must say, I based a lot of my material on him. I think he's a great, source of inspiration, but also on Deleuze and Guattari, because, in particular, I like Guattari because he has a clinical application. He developed his work out of a clinical application, and, it was about really practices of kind of mass, democracy within the psychiatry movement, and away from that kind of, so there are forms of learning here also, which is non-authoritarian forms of learning, non-fascist forms of learning. And, those interest me greatly. And I think that they are transferable. Now, when we come to, commodification, I would say, look, one of the interesting things about knowledge as a commodity is that the law of scarcity does not apply. And basically, why doesn't it apply? Well, because we can share a PDF with one person or 1 million people or 100 million people at no extra cost, zero cost, zero cost sharing. So, suddenly you move to a kind of post-industrial domain where knowledge operates differently from other commodities. I think that's absolutely fundamental. And we understand, the capacity now, increasing capacity of sophisticated cybernetic systems that are world systems now, developed by the big tech, where we labor endlessly and give away our personal data for free, and they suck it up, and they provide the kind of predictive products that we are psychologically well disposed to buy. That's how the model works. And there are an endless number of people who pointed this out, but I think within that mix, there's possibilities for open access, but also not only open access, but open science. I call open philosophy as well. And where the emphasis comes on peer structures and peer production and peer ownership. You got to own, simple ownership means the production of, symbolic production, kind of important here, particularly when you're talking about journals, and even at the level of a journal, that becomes extremely important. So, what are my roles in educational philosophy and theory? And, I'm retiring out of there, because I've been there 25 years. It's time for me to move on and for other people to have a go at doing it, And so, I'm on record of saying 2 years and I'm out of it, and you guys, it's better for me to just walk away and for you guys to have a go at doing it. But it does require quite a lot of time. You can't do it in one democratically elected year or two. You've really got to have a commitment to it, and you've got to work to it. But I think what we've done is to produce, we own the journal. Tina started up Pisa Agora. We had a conversation about a free open access aspect to the journal, which is kind of important. We've got another journal there that I was the editor of, and started by Jim Marshall and Conor Lancashire going back 1982. We've resurrected that. That's open access as well. So we really want the open access part of it, and we're making a lot of excuse me, a lot of material free online. So one way of breaking the subscription model is to, all the editorials are free, and a lot of the collective articles are free. So we're kind of like trying to change the practice there. And I think there are possibilities there. I think we need to talk about different forms of commodification also, because, the difference between a Walt Disney kind of rendition of Pocahontas and, a kind of indigenous, a paper about indigeneity that is published in a journal for which somebody has to pay a subscription. And also I want to say, I'm really keen, because they haven't yet colonized conversation,
That's what, Michael, that's what the metaverse is for.